Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's educational webinar hosted by the International Trade Council. My name is Ron Alaska, and I'm delighted to be your moderator for today's session. Before we start our discussion, let's take care of some quick housekeeping matters. Firstly, can everyone hear me clearly? If you can, please type in yes in the chat box. Okay, thank you, Anu. All right, excellent. Thank you for confirming. Now let's ensure that everyone can see the presentation slides. If you're experiencing any issues with the audio or visual, let us know in the chat box and I will assist you promptly. So it seems like everything is running smoothly. Just a quick reminder to our attendees, if you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to type them in the Q&A box located in your webinar interface. We'll address as many questions as possible during the Q&A session following the presentation. Without any further ado, let's get started with today's educational webinar. Our topic is navigating US hiring, a savvy approach for your US expansion. We will dive into consideration for expanding your businesses in the US, including the various ways to hire employees with or without US entity, when and how to set up the best entity structure, and which state are optimal for hiring based on your industry. We'll also cover essential services for payroll, HR, and compliance, as well as budgeting for US-based employees, including salaries and benefits. Whether you're just starting your expansion or fine-tuning your hiring strategy, this session will provide practical insights to help you navigate the US hiring landscape efficiently. So let's get started. Please join me in welcoming our speaker, Joanne Farquharson, CEO of Foothold America. Go ahead, Joanne.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Ron. I appreciate you getting us going here, and I'm delighted to be with the group today. I encourage you to ask questions because that's going to make this all the more relevant. Um, First, I'd like to thank the International Trade Council. They provide so much information and resources. I think it's a wonderful organization. So, kudos to you for being involved with them, and also the sponsor, International Center for Trade, Transparency, and Monitoring, and all of their technical services that they have for those of us who want to do business around the world. So here is our agenda today. We're going to go over a few items. I'm hoping that these are valuable topics for you. And again, I encourage you to put your questions in the chat so that we can make sure that this conversation is good for you. So, just a quick little bit about my background. Maybe you can tell from my accent that I am American. I was born there and lived there most of my life. I've also lived in the UK for 5 years, and now I'm sitting in my garden, in my office, in the south of France, in a very rural location. And that's the lovely thing about international business. We can be anywhere in the world and be successful. So we get to live, hopefully, where we want to be. And that's one of the joys of people operations. And specifically in the US, something that's very, very important is employee benefits. The US does not have um, a national health service. So it's very, very expensive there, and a big part of what business owners need to understand about hiring in the US. Um, so um, I will continue a little bit with the background of Foothold America. It's actually a lovely story, and as I'm sure many of you are entrepreneurs, and sometimes you, as you start your business, you might head in a direction you had no idea you would go, and that's what happened with Foothold America. Foothold America was founded by two British life science consultants. They lived in London and they were building their business, and they thought, we have to go to the US. We have to go to Boston in the US because that's the home of life sciences in the US. So they thought, that's what we'll do. One of us stays in London, one of us goes to the United States, we'll grow, grow, grow. And that was their plan. And when they got to the US, they realized it was a lot more difficult to manage things like compliance and payroll and the benefits, the health insurance benefits that are very important. They got some not great tax advice that they had to undo a few years later. So it took them a little while to figure out how to be successful in the US. And in a couple of years, their US revenue was much higher than the UK. And what happened was the British consulate in Boston realized that this company was doing well, and they said, can you help some other life science companies in the UK go to Boston? And that's when they realized, hey, we can help other people. They called the service Foothold America and began quite small. And after a while, they realized there are a lot of companies that could use some help stepping into the U.S. market. So now Foothold America stands on its own. We have our original founders as a part of our board of directors. We're a small team based in the US, UK, and Europe, and we provide full HR services, setting up of US entities. And the thing that Foothold makes Foothold America a little bit different than some other organizations is that our team is full of human resource specialists that can help clients through those sticky people situations that come up. And the other thing about Foothold America is even though we have offices in the US, we don't really consider ourselves an American company. We're an international company, and we purely serve international companies coming into the US. So we're not just an HR company that's a US HR company that can help different businesses, but we purely are here to help international businesses. So there are certain hallmarks. There's not one recipe to be successful in the US and know that it's time to have your US entity or hire employees. So I have seen over the years entrepreneurs that do many different pathways, many different choices. However, there are certain things that are often happening for companies that make you think, okay, it might be time now for us to expand to the US. So typically, our clients will have success in their home country. So wherever you're founded, you've developed this product or service, and you see evidence that you are doing well. You're selling in maybe your country and some other countries. You have the organization of your company where you know how your operations are working. You have a team that is skilled and knows your product. I mean, sometimes people will be somewhere in the world and say, we're first going to the US. That's where we're going to launch. Typically, though, they start with success nearby. And sometimes that success, most of the time, that success means that they have sales in the US. So this may be someone's ordered online and you ship your product to the US. This might be that you have a service, a software service, for example, and someone is purchasing it. And then what often happens is you go, whoa, we're actually already selling in the US and we weren't even trying. So this might be a place for us to be very purposeful and grow the business. Sometimes what makes companies realize it's the right time to expand is that they reach what is called a tax nexus in one or more of the states. So if you are considering the US, you probably know it's one country, 50 states. Some things are done on a federal level with one law for everyone. But many things like hiring and insurance and tax are done on the state level. So if you have had sales, say lots of people in California want to buy your product, and you've had a number of sales in the US, it could be that you owe tax to that state. And and that's a great situation to be in because your US sales are up. But generally, what that means is you're going to have to register in some way in the United States and pay your taxes. You may owe federal taxes, but generally, if you are selling a product that is taxable, when you reach a level where one of the states is saying to you, hey, you're going to owe us some tax, then that's the time often that companies will set up a US entity. Sometimes it might be as simple as having clients that say, we want you to have a US bank account. We don't want to pay for your service to a bank outside of the country. So the US is not necessarily the most advanced in some of their banking processes. So Europe and the UK are more advanced in doing things electronically. So you may find that some of your customers want you to have a US bank account. And some clients will say you must have a US entity. And typically for businesses outside of the country, this will be an LLC, limited liability company, or a C corporation. And so they want you to have that because they want to have recourse if something goes wrong. So if you are providing them a service and they're paying you a lot of money, or you're providing them a product and something goes wrong, they feel more comfortable when you have a US entity because they can use the court system to make sure that they are treated fairly. And of course, the US has a reputation for being very litigious, going to sue people a lot of the time. And while that is true, it's not as if you are going to be sued. But in the US, people take um, very obvious paths to protect themselves. So this is one example. So, maybe a Google comes to you, or Sony, or somebody, someone based in the US and says, we want you to provide service to us, but you must have a US entity and you must have a US bank account. So when those things happen, it's very common for companies to say, okay, now it's time to really expand. You might need liability insurance for products or services. And so that can be difficult to get in the US without having a presence in the US, like a US entity. Um, if you have intellectual property that you need to protect, you may be protecting it in your country, but you may need to take steps to protect it in the US as well. Sometimes it's just a very simple, you're many time zones away from the US, you have some sales, but you've got your team staying up all hours of the night in order to service these clients or take in sales or answer questions. So that's often the time when people say, okay, we've got some sales, we actually need people in the US to be able to handle our growing client base. Um, and some clients will very much do research first. So they'll go, before we even try to sell in the US, we're going to do some market research. And after this research, we have found that there is an opportunity for our business. So um, we're going to expand. Um, and also, you may discover that in the US, you can charge much more for your service than you have in other countries. So that's an exciting thing that happens. So when you see that happening, you might think, okay, Let's take advantage of this market. And then sometimes it's because the owner says, you know what? I want to get a visa. I want to live in the US, and therefore I'm going to use my business success in my home country to expand into the US because I've always wanted to live there. Or just like our founders, one of them thought this would be a good thing and we actually should move there. So if you are doing things like a visa or wanting to have a residence in the U.S., then having a business is a great way to make that happen. Also, many business owners will look to the United States for potential funding. So again, maybe you um, have seen that your business is doing well and you think you can get to that next level if you had some funding. And the US is ripe for funding for various industries. There is, not fully, but there is a bias where if you're a venture capitalist or a private equity firm, there's going to be some level of comfort with a US entity, and that this company has landed in the US and having some presence there. So sometimes it's the desire for funding that makes companies take that next step. So, of course, plenty of other reasons for why you might want to expand, but these are generally the ones that we'll see. I hope some of them apply to you, especially having sales in the US, because that's a very good indicator. So, what I have here are the typical pathways that companies um, wanting to expand to the US, the pathways that they tend to take. And this is a little bit different for service companies. So, you're not necessarily bringing physical products into the country, but maybe um, SaaS, enterprise software, or media services, things like that, things that are not physical. So, as I mentioned before, some amount of people, and this is based on our internal data, so this is not worldwide data, but just when we track our customers over the years, about 15% of them have expanded to the US. And the way they've done that is by sending the owner or a key individual into the US to sort of get the operations set up. So, and I'll say a lot of companies think that they have to do it this way because the only way to bring the culture of my company, from our home country into the United States is if we send one of our executives or key people. That way we can really develop our culture in the way that we want to. So that is an option for quite a few businesses. However, I've seen very successful companies integrate their culture into the US market by having the executives visiting or going into the US when they're hiring, that kind of thing. But there are quite a few people who decide, yes, I want to actually change residence and be there physically. Um, about 40% of clients will do what I call a tiptoe into the market. So you may have had those indicators that I mentioned on the previous slide. So you've got some sales and you're thinking that the US is an opportunity for you. And so, but you don't want to spend a lot of money, you don't want to make mistakes. So you start with your first people through what is called an EOR, so the testing the waters, where you might have one or two employees. Very often those are business development employees, so they may have an existing network in your industry, but they are there to sell your product or service so that you can develop or you can provide a service from your home country. And so they start with something, as I mentioned, EOR, which is an employer of record model. We'll talk about more. We'll talk about this in more detail coming up. but it doesn't require a U.S. bank account. It doesn't require a U.S. entity, and you can have people that are working and representing your company, and you avoid all of the compliance that goes along with this. So it's a very low risk way to enter the US. So many companies will start there. And the other section that's quite large is that next step where they say, well, we know we want a warehouse and we want 10 people working there. And we just have to have people in a warehouse to make sure the goods get distributed. Or we want an expanded sales force and account management um, team in the US and maybe a country manager or something like that. So they know that they're going to want a bigger team. And in that case, they may set up their entity and bank account right away because they have the funding to do that, or they feel very confident about how they'll be doing in the U.S. So that's generally how it breaks down. For that little sliver, it's those companies that, and they tend to be larger companies where they go, all right, we are an international company, time to go to the US, and we know that ultimately our US operations are going to far exceed what's happening in our home country or some other country. So they go into it planning to hire dozens, maybe hundreds of people. So sometimes someone does enter the market in that big way. More often, though, it's a little bit less grand. So a lot of just taking our time and planning it out. And I've now switched the slide, and this is more information for manufacturing companies. So, and please pardon me, I see that my slide says UK manufacturing, but this is manufacturing worldwide. So um, the the way that many manufacturers will tiptoe into the market is by using distributors. So they have a product and they want to get the product there using the international trade resources available through the Trade Council and some other groups. And they'll say, we're going to get our product into the US, but someone else is going to help us distribute it and sell it. And that's a very common way to get started because the infrastructure for the industry, say furniture, for example, or electronics, is already there, and it's a good way to get started. It can also be quite expensive because you have to pay quite a bit of money to your distributors, and sometimes it's hard to get the attention of your distributors and to make sure that your product is something that they're promoting. But that is a common way for manufacturers to enter the market. And in that red section, the 30%, it's very similar to services where they say, you know what, we want someone to sell for us. So we want, as they say, boots on the ground. We want someone to be able to sell, um, even if even if that person is working remotely, they're working from their home behind the computer. There is something valuable about being a citizen of the country where you are trying to do the business, um, and being in the same time zones and things like that. So when we say boots on the ground for business development, it may not be the old school kind of sales where you're going to meetings and things like that, but you may be working remotely and selling throughout the United States. And that happens a lot, especially post COVID. It used to be years ago, people would consider where they should land in the US based on where the airports are for their convenience coming in when they come in. But not so much anymore. You have the ability to find business development people anywhere in the country, and there are big differences in salaries from one location to another. So you can find that you can hire someone quite successfully in an area of the country that's not as expensive, and then save yourself some money um, by doing that. And also, manufacturers will often build their own workforce, so they may um, build a warehouse, rent a warehouse, have warehouse workers, have an office, have account managers and things like that. So they grow their own workforce, and sometimes it starts with a distributor, and then when you're comfortable, you say, okay, I get this now. I'm going to do this myself. Um, and occasionally, manufacturers that have access to capital and have, are quite successful will come into the US by storm and say, yes, we are going to be growing our team to, dozens and hundreds within 18 months. So there are those that will come into the market in that way. Um, so that's just a general pathways that companies use. And the next thing I want to talk about is hiring models. So this is where Foothold America comes in, and you have some choices to make about how you would like involved. So sometimes there's e-commerce, and you can have. Uh-oh, did I lose the? Uh, it looks like I lost. Did I stop sharing? No.
No, it's
Hmm.
there.
Oh, it is? Okay, something changed for me, so I can't. I just see myself. I don't see the slides anymore. But you can see them. Is that right?
Yes, can everyone see the slides? Because I can see it's US hiring models.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, yep,
Okay, great. Something changed on my screen, so I'm glad
yep.
that you
Someone
can see it.
replied.
So oh, good, good, good. So the first hiring model, I mentioned it earlier, but this is an important term to know when it comes to expanding into the US. So you'll hear people say EOR, EOR, and this has skyrocketed since COVID because people know you can get very productive employees working from home, and that means your expansion into other parts of the world is made that much easier. So years ago, when I was doing this, no one knew what an employer of record was, and they just they would Google how to hire in the U.S., which of course you can still do, but employer of record is one of those terms that's worthwhile to know. So what is lovely about an employer of record service is it's turnkey. You don't have to have the entity, U.S. entity. You don't have to have a U.S. bank account. And essentially, what you're doing is working with an organization that is the employer of record. They are the ones that have a US entity, they pay the taxes, they manage the compliance. And essentially, what they do, and Foothold America is one of these companies, is we hire the employee that you've identified, or we can help you find an employee, but you say, okay, I found this person, they're great, they live in Miami, and I want to hire them because they're going to help us grow our sales in the US, for example. And so the employer of record hires that person under their entity, and when that person is hired by Foothold America or the other, any other EOR, that employee has agrees to work on behalf of their client. So if you're our client, we'll go, okay, you want to hire this person, and they are going to report to you. They're going to put themselves on LinkedIn. They work for you, and they see Foothold America or the employer of record. They see the employer of record as the background company. These are the people who are making sure I get paid, making sure I get benefits. They track our leave, all of the comprehensive HR services that could be confusing to a company coming into the US. So it's taken care of by others. It's very fast. So you can find your candidate and they can be working a week later. And it's low risk because you don't have to worry about compliance. Your employer of record is taking care of that. And it's also, there's no long-term commitment. So maybe you find someone and you go, I think they'd be great. And then something shifts in your company and you go, you know what, we're going to expand to a different country, or the US isn't working for us, and you haven't made a long-term commitment. So this is something that is very, very popular for getting started, for testing the waters. I'm giving you a basic price there, and that is, and we're going to talk more about how much does it actually cost, but that rate is $600 US dollars per employee per month. So that is taking care of all of the administrative services. In addition to that, the employer of record is going to charge you, of course, the salary of the employee, the employer taxes, all the benefits and things like that. So you'll be paying the full amount, but the service itself is going to cost around $600 per employee per month. Okay, so that's your first option for hiring. So um, the next one, it's another set of initials that's worthwhile understanding. This one is called PEO, and it stands for Professional Employer Organization. And so, again, you can Google PEO. Americans are used to PEOs. Essentially, what it is a service that shares the responsibility of hiring with businesses, because it's so complicated for American businesses to do business in America or have employees in different states. So they partner up with a PEO so that they are co-employing the employee. So it's more responsibility than EOR, because you must have a US entity, you must have a US bank account. You are generally making more of a commitment to the country, to a contract with a PEO. So generally, you'll be signing up for a year, and there's more setup process. It's not turnkey like employer of record where you just plug in. Here, you'll be making decisions like how many, how much should I contribute to health insurance, or what is my policy around vacation time, things like that, or do I want to put in a retirement benefit for employees, things like that. So you have more control over what your how you manage your US workforce, but you also have responsibilities, because you will have to be paying the taxes directly to the different states from your US entity. And the PEO relationship helps you manage that, but there is still more responsibility. So I've put some just general fees down at the bottom. So the setup, as I said, is more comprehensive. So it's going to be a few $1,000s to set up. And then the ongoing fees per employee per month, they can vary depending on the level of services. But in general, for a small group, you can plan on about 250 dollars per employee per month. So you can see it's a lower cost option than EOR, but over time. Um, but as I said, it is more of a commitment. And we help companies move from EOR to PEO all the time. Sometimes they go back from PEO to EOR because things have slowed down, and they want to have a little bit more freedom to leave the market if they want to. But very often, EOR is a starting place, and then the progression to PEO can come next. Some companies may only ever want one employee, and I've seen this. It's just one little employee, and their business in the US grows, and they don't ever have to have more than that there. They just have one employee, EOR, and then they're selling in the United States. And there's some tax things to consider, even if you don't have an entity and or a bank account. And that is a different discussion with tax advisors. one of the things Foothold America does is connect in our ecosystem with tax advisors who are familiar with any country and the US. So it's really important to make sure that you're, outside of hiring, you're considering how your sales may impact your tax obligation. Um, two more hiring models that are available to you. One is to hire an independent contractor. And this, many countries have this sort of terminology. It could be called a consultant, it could be a sole proprietor. Essentially, you are looking to work with someone that is not an employee. You're not paying employer taxes, you're not providing benefits. This person is independent of your company, but you have an agreement with them, say, to um, provide IT services or accounting services or to sell your product. Now, that last thing I said, to sell your product, is where it gets a bit tricky because there is a risk of misclassification. If um, if there were no classification issues, many people would hire independent contractors because they cost less than employees. You don't have to do the benefits, and you don't have to have an agreement that takes into account all the laws of the different states. So it's easier. However, if the IRS, so that's the federal tax authority in the US, thinks that you've chosen an independent contractor, but you are interacting with this person in a way that is pretty much like an employee, then you run the risk for fines and back pay. So, this is really something to be careful about. So again, you might have an independent contractor that's helping you with your US accounting. That's fine. But when you start talking about, I want them to represent our company, they'll hold our business cards, they'll list our company name on LinkedIn, we'll put them on our website. We tell them what hours to work and who they report to. When those kinds of things are happening, they truly are not independent contractors. So even though this is an attractive model for some people where they go, and I just want to try it, I'll have a contract with this person and see how it goes. It is a risky thing to do. I have seen people start with this and they'll go, well, we're not sure if we want to hire, so we're going to have a contract for a couple of months. And what you will find there is that many Americans want to be employees. They don't want to be independent contractors. And it certainly depends on the industry, but what Americans generally are going to want is benefits such as health insurance instead of doing it on their own. And when they're an independent contractor, their taxes become more complicated. And also, you want to make sure that if you are hiring a contractor, that they have their own general liability insurance. So it's just important to ask all these questions. In theory, it looks very easy, but it can be risky and complicated. And lastly, this one, direct hire, probably doesn't apply to those of you who are just thinking about entering the market, because this is when a company, those little slivers in the pie charts that I showed, where they know they're going to grow quickly, and instead of using an employer of record, they will set up their entity. Instead of using a PEO where there's a co-employment, they said, you know what? We're in the US, we're going to build it. We're going to hire, a, have a payroll company, and we'll have someone that helps us with insurance. And they essentially are unbundling all of the people operations and saying, we're going to build this ourselves, because that's, how our company is. We don't want another service. We want to put our fingerprint on this and build it the way we think is best, that reflects the rest of our organization. So it's ideal for groups over 50. And just as I mentioned before, Some business will start at EOR, go to PEO, and eventually they decide to do all the hiring themselves. So it is a progression that happens for some companies. Um, and occasionally a company will come in and say, we're committed. We're going to do the hiring directly into our entity, and we'll put all the pieces together ourselves. So those are the common hiring models for when you decide it's time to have people on board. And this little budget is something that we do for clients, and I encourage you to do this kind of budgeting because it can be quite shocking for non-US companies to hire in the US because salaries are quite high in the US. And also certain parts of the country, hiring um, a business development representative in New York might cost you 30% more than that same person with the same qualifications in North Carolina. And even within one state, for example, Florida, we have a team in Florida, and we are based in Boston because as the story I told you about our founders. Um, but we were able to get much more senior people for the same price when they were in different parts of the country. So we have an office in Tampa, a virtual office in Tampa. Um, and just if you go further south to Miami, Miami is quite an expensive city, and it's a lovely, lovely city, very glamorous, but it is more expensive there. So it's really important to kind of go, well, how much is this person going to need to make for me to get the right representative for our country and it's or for the US expansion. It's super important because this may be you're betting a lot of money on an individual to have a good outcome for you. So I've used in this example a salary of $100,000 a year, which I would say probably 60 or, oh gosh, probably even more than that, 75% of the employees that we manage on behalf of our clients are making over $100,000. We certainly have people making 50, 60, $70,000, but it's important to just realize that salaries are quite high. And certain states like California and New York will say this is the minimum that you can pay someone that is getting an annual salary. It could be 60 or $70,000. And it's also important to know the US has a minimum wage. So I think right now the federal minimum wage, oh my gosh, I think it's $7.25 or 50 cents, something like that. So it's unlikely that you will be paying minimum wage for an hourly employee unless maybe you are having a warehouse in the US. So there is a minimum wage, and some states, again, California and New York, are very expensive states to do business. Their minimum wage might be $15, $16 an hour, which is somewhere around $30,000 a year. That's the minimum wage if you are paying the employee per hour. And if they work more than 40 hours a week or 80 hours in 2 weeks, you will have to pay them overtime, which is 1.5 times their hourly wage. So part of the hiring discussion and the figuring out what your budget is which classification does your employee belong in, hourly or salary, and then you have to address the minimum wages in different states. So it gets a bit tricky. But I've used $100,000 as the example there. Um, and then this section here, the next section down are the costs that employers pay for the statutory requirements. So you have to have workers' compensation in place in case someone gets hurt, and you have to pay into an unemployment fund. in case you lay off the employee, you don't want them to work for you anymore, and they're unemployed, they can get some money from the government. And this is about 12% on top of that $100,000. And then there are benefits that some employers will add. And these are sort of nice extras. They could cost about 4% on top of that. Of the ones shown on this screen, which I hope you can see, and we can make these slides available to you. The 401k, that's another bit of terminology that's important to know. The 401k is a retirement plan for employees, and that is going to be considered something that is quite important. The administrative fees for whoever is performing your operations for payroll and compliance. And then this is the part, the last bit, that is really shocking to some, is that business owners will pay $12,000 to $18,000 on average per employee per year to provide health insurance benefits. So the taxes may seem low compared to some other parts of the world, but when you add in the health insurance, you're essentially adding 40% to the salary. So nuances to this. But when you're thinking about your expansion and people, this is a great tool. So, Ron, I have gotten to the point, I think right on time, where I would love to take some of the questions that people have put in the chat. I haven't had a chance to see those, but Ron, I'm sure you'll lead the way.
Yes, thank you for our first speaker for sharing other valuable insight today. Before we move to the Q&A, I'd like to take a moment to highlight Adam FTD, a powerful platform developed by ICTTM. If you're interested in streamlining your trade compliance processes and gaining deeper market intelligence, Adam FTD offers an incredible suite of tools to help your business stay ahead in ever-changing global landscape. So for more information to get started, feel free to reach out to us and we're happy to connect you with the right resources. So let's open the floor for your questions. I see one question here, but please feel free to type in your question in our chat box or even in our Q&A box. So before we proceed, I just want to remind everyone this webinar is recorded. It will be uploaded to our YouTube channel if you would like to replay, and you will receive a certificate of participation by attending this webinar. So first question here, how much time to take a foreigner's employee for US to hire a job for logistics?
Okay, so I think what I heard was how much time to find the right candidate for a logistics position. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes, it's actually on it's projecting on the screen right now.
Oh, okay.
You
Let
can
me stop sharing. That might be helpful. Thank you. Okay, I had something in front.
yes.
How much time to take a foreigner's employee for US to hire a job for logistics? So, um, I guess there's two ways that I can think to answer this question. One is, are you planning to hire a US person for this position? And so in general, things will move very quickly in the US when it comes to hiring. There's something called at will employment, which means an employee can be terminated or an employee can leave without notice. It's called at will. So at any time, someone can leave. And what that generally they'll give 2 weeks notice, the employer or the employee. But because of that, the turnover in jobs can happen very quickly. So of course, it depends on where you're looking for this person and the level of person that you're looking for. But a logistics position would be very, very easy to find unless it's a very specialized niche. But I would say give yourself 2 months to find that employee. If what the question is bringing your logistics person into the US to work, then that's going to be the visa process, and that would depend on the country of origin of the company and the person and what kind of visa. But if that is the case, I would say you want to give yourself at least 6 months to plan to get that person into the US to work for you as logistics. So I hope I answered the question the right way in either one of those situations.
All right. Thank you. All right. So
Mhm.
please feel free to type in your question here in the chat box. I'm actually going to type in a question from ITC. Maybe Joanne can answer this as well. Let me just so for companies that may not be ready to establish a full US entity, what alternative hiring or market entry strategies would you recommend to ensure compliance and minimize risk?
Great question. And I hope everyone in this webinar would know the answer to that. So when it comes to hiring, it would be an employer of record model is a great way for a company to just test the waters, but also manage compliance and minimize their risk. When it comes to market entry strategies, that could be many different things and not include a person. So you may be very able to sell your product or to establish a presence in the US without hiring. And when it comes to how to avoid risk, if you are planning a different kind of market entry. So one example is to use digital advertising, so Google advertising, things like that. So those kinds of market entry strategies are not high risk. The risk comes around tax, really, because if you are able to sell into the US without that person, then your primary compliance is going to be around tax. In that case, I would make sure that you have a US qualified tax advisor right from the start. Don't start selling and then go, uh-oh, now what do I do? So tax is the biggest area for managing risk. And then the other area of compliance is going to depend on your industry. So if you are in biotech or life sciences, things like that, there are going to be other kinds of compliance that you need to meet. So even, electronics or various insurance products, things like that, there are going to be other layers of compliance that you have to meet. And I think the best way to manage that is to build a network and look for associations like International Trade Council and other associations that can help you learn what are the special kinds of compliance issues that apply to my industry.
All right, very well. Thank you so much for that, Joanne. So I don't see any more question here. I believe that the presentation has been well presented and all the information has been answered. So I would like to ask Joanne if you would like to add more information about the presentation before we conclude the webinar.
The only thing I would add is I had my contact information up there very briefly when I was sharing screen. So, Ron, if you're welcome to make the slides available, and of course,
Okay.
the recording will have this information. I welcome everyone to connect with me on LinkedIn, and if I can help you along the way, I would love to do that. I have a very broad network around the world. So if you need to be connected with someone in your journey to the US, I am happy to help.
Perfect. Thank you for your insightful presentation, Joanne, and thank you to all of our participants for joining us today. On behalf of International Trade Council, we appreciate your time and engagement, and we hope that you found today's valuable session valuable and informative. So, if you have any further questions or any additional information or resources, please feel free to reach out to me. And again, thank you, and we look forward seeing you in our future events. Joanne, thank you so much, and we hope to have you speak again with us in the future webinars.
Thank you, Rana. It's been a pleasure.
Have a great day, everyone.